think it's important for us to remember the slogan that's also on a bumper sticker, which is, if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. They work for us, we don't work for them. I'm glad that they've been here for us. Our next speaker has been very involved in events surrounding the World Can't Wait Drive Out Bush regime across the country, because she is the national coordinator of the campaign. And I have to warn you ahead of time, my good friend who I'm introducing right now was in Philadelphia, and last time we spoke together at an event, there was tear gas and police riot squads coming through the street. Although that was the Republican convention, if anybody remembers that. It wasn't hard to have that happen. But I am very pleased to announce and introduce our next speaker, good friend DEBRA Sweet.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I don't think there's going to be tear gas tonight, but my good friend John Nichols just mentioned that despite all that, we failed in 2000. We have George Bush as president. So, with that, I want to jump into bringing some challenges and some sobering news to this evening tonight. And I'm going to read you some quotes from people that you may have seen this week in Philadelphia. In April, the Supreme Court upheld what was dishonestly called the Partial Birth Abortion Bill. And here's what George Bush said about it. The Supreme Court's decision is an affirmation of the progress we've made over the past 6 years in protecting human dignity. But last September, when it was pressing for the passage of the notorious Military Commissions Act, Bush lashed out at the Geneva Conventions. He wiped out habeas corpus for a whole bunch of people, a whole class, saying, "What does that mean, outrages upon human dignity?" Quoting the Geneva Conventions. These two quotes concentrate for us the Orwellian misuse of language of Bush's and his fundamentalist agenda. And I call it a fascist agenda, really. Think about what kind of a world he is trying to bring into being and those that follow him. And this means for us that if the agenda that the Bush presidency has ushered in is not repudiated, and the Bush regime is not driven out in disgrace from office before their term is up, then the sweeping changes this administration has become will become legitimate and will continue no matter who follows as president. Many of the people in this audience, many of you are here tonight because you thought you did something dramatic in November, that the Democrats were going to end this war and stop this whole direction. And I want to say that they could have. They didn't have to send a funding bill to Bush funding that war. They didn't have to give him $100 billion to keep it going. They didn't have to do it without a timetable. But they did it. This is in keeping with their record. They didn't have to allow Alito and Roberts to get on the Supreme Court, at least not without a hell of a fight. Now, what have we had happen in the last 2 weeks at the end of this disastrous term of the Supreme Court? At least 12 decisions. Destroying Brown v. Board of Education, setting the legal basis for the end of abortion, and all sorts of other things that we never wanted and we never voted for. And there's worse to come. George Bush could appoint another Supreme Court justice if we don't remove him in disgrace. The Democrats could have impeached him for illegal wiretapping, as David and John were both talking about. But what did they do? They actually made that illegal wiretapping legal. The Democrats could have looked up the chain of command and held Bush and Rumsfeld accountable for the crimes against humanity when the conscience of the world was shocked at Abu Ghraib in Guantanamo. Why they passed the Military Commissions Act without lying down on the floor of the Senate and saying, "Not over my dead body is torture going to become official in this country." And then we have Iran, which is probably our biggest challenge in this country right now. In recent weeks, Dick Cheney, while he was still apparently a member of the executive branch, stood on an aircraft carrier off Iran's coast, threatening that the U.S. would, quote, prevent Iran from gaining nuclear weapons and dominating this region. 3 strike groups with 2 aircraft carriers and 70 attack planes sailed through the Straits of Hormuz. And Joe Lieberman said, "We've got to be prepared to take aggressive military action." To me, that would include a strike over the border into Iran by air. Much more has and is being done to prepare for this possible air attack on Iran. The news has been reporting increasingly that in the debate between diplomacy and preparations for war, war is winning in this administration. Cheney's position on the war is ascending, and there were reports of a showdown by this fall. All of this flows from the core objectives of the Bush regime to radically reshape the whole Middle East as part of creating an unchallenged and unchallengeable empire globally. And their difficulties in Iraq, as much of a disaster as this is, and in the whole region, have actually only heightened the prospect of war in Iran. When people say, this is a debacle in Iraq, they're hemmed in, they can't attack Iran, I don't believe them. George Bush is telling us what he's going to do if we don't stop him. And this attack would be absolutely catastrophic. It would pour gasoline on the very negative global dynamic in which U.S. aggression fuels reactionary Islamic fundamentalism, which in turn is used then back by the Bush administration to justify further aggression against the people of the Middle East. The flames of this dynamic are consuming the oxygen that secular and progressive forces need to get a hearing and a following in those countries. And if this dynamic continues, nothing and no one on this planet will be untouched. Yet all the viable presidential candidates, present company excluded, are on record saying that they would take no option, including the use of nuclear weapons, off the table in dealing with Iran. Hillary, in dealing with this threat, no option that can be taken off the table. Obama, we should take no option, including military action, off the table. Edwards, we need to keep all the options on the table. And remember what is not on that table. Impeachment. Look, Bush is not over. He is still the commander-in-chief. He is still a wartime president, and in my opinion, he is still a war criminal. Here's the problem. In this country, there are still too many people hoping that someone can sort things out in 2008 and fix this nightmare. But what we got in 2006 is what we're going to get in 2008 if we don't change this dynamic. We've got to do something radically different. And again, I say, if Bush is not driven from office, if his program is not repudiated before the end of his term, then everything he's done, the legalization of torture, the ripping up of the rule of law, the spying and lying and the assaults on women and gays and science and critical thought, his betrayal of black people in New Orleans, all of this will be on the table